Don't scream.
Please. My baby.
I was paid to stop you.
That scar. Dad? I didn't know it was you.
But she's waiting for proof.
That scar.
Is she dead?
Now bring her here.
I was hired to make sure you don't make it to the delivery room. But I think you already knew someone wanted you gone. You just didn't know it was your own blood who told them where to find you. Naomi Hale is 8 months pregnant, married to one of Manhattan's most powerful CEOs, and completely alone in a way that no amount of money can fix. When she realizes she's being followed, she does what she's always done. She says nothing and handles it herself. What she doesn't know is that the man hired to kill her has already seen her face and chosen not to pull the trigger. And the reason he hesitated will unravel a conspiracy that stretches back 8 years, through a faked death, a stolen fortune, and a father who made the worst choice of his life. This is not a story about a woman who gets rescued. This is a story about a woman who finds out exactly how many people wanted her gone and decides to make every single one of them answer for it. Chapter 1. Someone is watching you. Mrs. Hale. The appointment ran 7 minutes long, which meant Naomi missed the elevator and had to take the stairs down from the 14th floor of the Meridian Women's Health Center on East 72nd Street. 7 minutes. She'd been timing everything lately, the gaps between Dominic's texts, the seconds it took him to look up when she walked into a room, the exact number of days since he'd put his hand on her stomach without being asked. She tracked these things the way she used to track market fluctuations back when she still worked. Back before the pregnancy made the partners at Callaway and Reed quietly suggest she take an early leave. She tracked them because she didn't know what else to do with the feeling that something was coming apart, and counting gave her the illusion of control. The stairwell smelled like antiseptic and old carpet. Her hand stayed on the railing the whole way down, the way Dr. Anand had told her to, both hands on rails when possible. Naomi, you're 34 weeks, not 34 years old. Please act accordingly. She'd smiled at that. She was good at smiling at things she didn't find particularly funny. On the second-floor landing, she stopped. There was a man on the street below. She could see him through the narrow vertical window beside the stairwell door. The kind of window that existed purely for fire code compliance and had no business being as revealing as it was. He was standing at the northeast corner of the building's entrance, against the low stone wall that separated the clinic's small ornamental garden from the sidewalk. Gray coat, dark pants, no bag. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't waiting for anyone coming out of the building. His eyes weren't tracking the door. He was tracking the window. Naomi stepped back from the glass. She stood there for a moment, one hand still on the railing, the other flat against the cold concrete wall, and made herself breathe evenly. You're 8 months pregnant in the middle of Manhattan, she told herself. People stand on corners. That is a thing people do. She waited 30 seconds, then looked again. He was gone. She took the last flight of stairs slowly, pushed through the lobby, nodded to the front desk coordinator who always called her Mrs. Hale, in a voice that managed to be both warm and slightly pitying, and stepped out onto 72nd Street into the flat gray light of a Tuesday afternoon in late October. The air had that particular New York bite to it, not cold enough to be winter yet, but cold enough that she could feel it in the back of her throat. She pulled her coat tighter across her stomach. The coat was a deep charcoal wool, custom tailored, one of 3 Dominic had ordered for her when she started showing, and her old coats stopped closing. She hadn't asked for them. She hadn't asked for a lot of things. She looked left, then right. The corner where the man had been standing was empty. A woman with a double stroller was negotiating the crosswalk. A bike messenger cut too close to a town car and got honked at. Naomi's car was waiting at the curb, her driver, Paul, already out of the car and holding the door before she reached it. "How'd it go?" Paul asked. He always asked. He was 62 and had 3 grandchildren, and he'd been driving for the Hale household for 11 years, which meant he'd been driving for Dominic's first wife, too, though he had the grace never to mention it. "Good," Naomi said. "Everything's right on track." She got in. Paul closed the door, and as the car pulled into traffic, Naomi looked out the rear window once, quickly. The way she'd trained herself to do it, so it looked like she was just watching the street. The man in the gray coat was back. He was standing half a block behind them now, and he wasn't looking at the car. He was looking directly at her. The Hale penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of a pre-war building on East 68th Street, between Park and Lexington, which Dominic's grandmother had purchased in 1974, and which the family had renovated twice, since without ever quite managing to make it feel modern. It was a beautiful apartment, in the way that a museum wing is beautiful, meticulously maintained, deeply impressive, and not entirely comfortable to exist inside. Naomi had learned to love specific corners of it. The window seat in the library that got afternoon sun from the west. The small kitchen alcove where the housekeeper, Rosa, kept a particular brand of chamomile tea that Naomi had mentioned liking exactly once and which had appeared in the cabinet every week since without comment. She went straight to the library when she got home. Rosa was off on Tuesdays, and the apartment had that particular silence that large spaces develop when no one is in them, sound absorbent and slightly hollow. Naomi put her bag on the window seat, took off her coat, and stood in front of the bookshelf on the east wall for a moment before she understood what was bothering her. The photograph had been moved. It was a small silver-framed photograph, maybe 5 inches by 7, and it had sat in the same position on the 3rd shelf of the east bookcase for the 3 years she'd lived here, slightly in front of the row of books, angled maybe 15 degrees toward the room. She'd placed it there herself the week after she moved in, and she'd never moved it because she'd learned early that if you found a place for something painful, something you needed to keep but couldn't look at too directly, you left it exactly where it was. The frame was now facing fully outward, perfectly perpendicular to the shelf, as if someone had picked it up, looked at it, and set it back down without knowing exactly how it had been angled. Naomi crossed the room and picked it up. It was a photograph of her and her father, Marcus Hale. She was 9 years old in the picture, standing on the dock behind the house they'd rented in Cape Cod the summer before everything fell apart, squinting into the sun and laughing at something off camera. Her father had his arm around her shoulders, and he was laughing too, with his whole face, the way he used to before the business pressure started pulling the laughter out of him piece by piece. He was wearing a navy Henley, and on his left hand, the hand resting on Naomi's shoulder, there was a pale, curved scar along the base of his thumb, left over from a fishing hook accident when she was 6. She set the photograph back in its original position, 15 degrees, angled toward the room. Rosa was off. Dominic had been in Chicago since Sunday and wasn't back until tomorrow. No one else had a key. The cleaning crew, she told herself. They were in Friday. Someone picked it up, dusted the shelf. She sat down on the window seat, put her hands on her stomach, and felt the baby shift a slow, rolling pressure, like something turning over in deep water. "I know," she said quietly. "I know." She reached for her phone. She had 2 texts from Dominic, both sent this morning. The first a forwarded calendar notification for Thursday's dinner with the Aldridge family. The second, a single-sentence meetings running late. "Don't wait up. He was back tomorrow, not tonight." She'd misread the itinerary. She put the phone down without responding. Dominic Hale's Chicago meetings ended at 4:15, which was not late by anyone's definition. And by 5 o'clock, he was in the back of a car heading not to the airport but to the private dining room of a restaurant called Anise on the 31st floor of the Meridian Tower, where Celeste Vane had reserved a corner table for 2 under a different name. Celeste was already there when he arrived. She always was. It was one of the things about her, the sense that she had gotten somewhere before you and had already arranged the room to her liking. She was 30 years old, with dark hair she wore pulled back in a way that should have looked severe and somehow didn't. And she'd worked her way up from junior analyst to senior director of acquisitions at Hale Group in 4 years, which was either impressive or alarming, depending on how closely you paid attention to the path she'd taken. Dominic had stopped paying close attention about 18 months ago. "You look tired," she said, when he sat down. "Long day." He picked up the glass of water already poured at his place. "You said you had something urgent." "I do." Celeste reached into the slim leather portfolio beside her and set a small stack of papers on the table, pushing them toward him with 2 fingers. "Precisely. These came through the account monitoring system. I flagged them personally because I didn't think you'd want anyone else seeing them first." Dominic looked at the papers without touching them. Bank statements, or something formatted to look like bank statements. Account numbers. Transfer records. He picked up the top sheet. "These are transfers out of a joint account," he said. "A joint account Naomi opened 18 months ago without declaring it in your most recent financial review," Celeste said. Her voice was the same tone she used in board presentations, measured, factual, carrying the specific authority of someone who has done their homework. "The transfers are consistent, small amounts, irregular intervals, always to the same recipient account. We traced the recipient. It's registered to a holding company incorporated in Delaware, but the beneficial owner is an individual." She paused. "A man." Dominic set the paper down. "Who ran this trace?" "I did. Personally. No one else knows." He was quiet for a moment. The city spread out below them through the floor-to-ceiling windows, gray and lit and indifferent. "This could be anything," he said. "A charity, a financial advisor." "The transfers accelerated over the last 3 months," Celeste said. "Right around the time she found out she was pregnant." She reached across the table and turned the top sheet over, revealing a second document, printed email headers, partial conversation logs. "And there's this." Dominic looked at the emails. He read the first 3 lines of the top one. Then he set it face down on the table and didn't look at it again. "I thought you should know," Celeste said softly. "Thank you," Dominic said, and his voice was completely flat. "I'll handle it." The call from Dominic's lawyer came the following morning, while Naomi was still in bed. She'd slept badly, a combination of the third trimester's particular brand of physical discomfort and the low-level alertness that had been running underneath everything since yesterday's appointment. The man in the gray coat, the moved photograph. She'd gotten up at 2 in the morning and walked through the apartment in the dark, checking the locks on the front door and the service entrance, which she recognized was probably excessive. And then she'd gone back to bed and stared at the ceiling until somewhere around 4. The lawyer was named Gerald Fitch. He'd been with the Hale family for 20 years and had a voice that managed to convey everything he needed to say without technically saying any of it. He told Naomi that Dominic had asked him to prepare a supplemental property agreement for her review, a routine document in light of the upcoming arrival of a child and some questions that had arisen regarding certain accounts. And could she come by the office at her convenience, or should he send it to her directly? Send it, Naomi said. Of course. Mrs. Hale. She held the phone for a moment after the call ended, looking at the morning light coming through the curtains. Then she got up, got dressed, made tea in the kitchen alcove, the chamomile, Rose's brand, and sat down at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen. She wrote 3 things. Dormant trust Hale name. Who set it up? What triggers the audit? Gerald Fitch had mentioned the trust 3 weeks ago, in the context of updating estate documents for the baby, a passing reference, almost a footnote. There's also a dormant trust instrument in your name, Mrs. Hale. Predating your marriage, will want to include that in the updated filings. Naomi had made a mental note and then let it slip. The way you let things slip when you are 8 months pregnant and managing approximately everything by yourself. She hadn't let it slip. She'd filed it. She underlined the second item. Who set it up? The trust predated her marriage to Dominic. She'd had nothing to do with its creation, which meant someone else, someone with the name Hale, or with access to that name, had set it up for her. She put down the pen and pressed both palms flat on the table. Her father's name was Marcus Hale. He had died 8 years ago, a cardiac event, sudden, the kind that takes people before anyone is ready. She'd identified the body herself, or she'd tried to. The funeral home had been deeply apologetic about the condition of the remains. She'd been 24 and alone, and she'd signed the paperwork they gave her, and then gone home and sat in her apartment for 4 days without eating very much. Marcus Hale. A dormant trust instrument in your name, Mrs. Hale, predating your marriage. Naomi looked at the name she'd underlined, and a feeling moved through her that she couldn't quite categorize. Not grief, not hope, something in the narrow, vertiginous space between the two. She picked up her pen and added a 4th line. Find out if he's really dead. Dominic came home that afternoon. He was quieter than usual, not cold. Exactly, more like carefully modulated. The way he got when he was managing something he hadn't decided how to handle yet. He kissed her cheek when he came in. He asked how the appointment had gone. He listened to her answer. None of it was unkind. It was just the performance of a man going through the correct motions. And Naomi had been watching performances long enough to know the difference. Gerald called me this morning, she said, while they were in the kitchen. I know. Dominic poured himself a glass of water. I asked him to. The supplemental property agreement. It's standard. Naomi, with a child coming. The estate documents need to reflect. You want me to sign something that restricts what I can access from our joint accounts before the baby is born, she said, not angry, just clear. She was very good at being clear. Dominic was quiet for a moment. He set the glass down. "There are some discrepancies I'd like to understand," he said carefully. "Before we get further into the process, what discrepancies?" He looked at her then, and she could see it. The thing that had settled into him somewhere between Sunday and tonight. Some piece of information he'd accepted without questioning its source. The way he sometimes accepted reports from his senior directors without questioning who'd compiled them. "We can talk about it when you've had a chance to review the agreement," he said. "I'm not signing anything until you tell me what discrepancies." She kept her voice level. She kept her hands flat on the counter. Dominic looked at her for another moment, then looked away. "Get some rest," he said. "You look tired." She watched him walk out of the kitchen. She listened to his footsteps in the hallway, the click of the study door closing behind him. Then she picked up her pen and her legal pad and added a fifth line. Who gave him the discrepancies? That night, while Dominic worked in the study with the door closed, Naomi sat in the library in the blue dark and called a woman named Diana Chu, who had been her closest friend at Callaway and Reed, and was still 8 years into private practice. One of the most quietly dangerous contract lawyers in the city. "I need a favor," Naomi said. "Off the books." "It's 10:30 on a Tuesday," Diana said. "I know." A pause. "How off the books?" "I need you to pull everything you can find on a trust instrument under my name, maiden name. Hale, predating my marriage. I need to know who created it, when, what the triggering conditions are, and whether there's been any activity in the last 8 years. Another pause. Longer. "Naomi, are you okay?" "I'm fine." She looked at the photograph on the bookshelf, her father's hand on her shoulder, the scar along the base of his thumb. "I just need to know if something I was told was true." "I'll make some calls in the morning," Diana said. "Thank you." She hung up. The apartment was silent. Outside the window, the city moved through its nighttime rhythms, distant sirens, the low, continuous murmur of traffic, lights coming on and off in the towers across the park. Naomi put her hand on her stomach and held it there. The baby moved, slow and deliberate. "Present. We're okay," Naomi said softly. "Whatever it is, we figure it out." She meant it. She always meant it. She just didn't yet know what it actually was. Chapter 2. The Man Who Didn't Pull the Trigger. The rain started on Thursday. The way October rain in New York always starts without warning and with a certain personal hostility, as if the city itself had decided you'd had enough dry days and it was time to recalibrate your expectations. By 7 in the evening, it was coming down in steady, wind-driven sheets, and the underground parking garage beneath the Meridian Tower on 57th Street, where Naomi had spent the afternoon in a consultation with her financial advisor. A meeting she'd scheduled herself and told no one about, had the particular quality of a place that exists outside of normal time. Concrete and fluorescent light, and the smell of exhaust and wet asphalt tracked in from the ramp. The sound of rain on the street above translated into a low, constant hiss that swallowed footsteps. Naomi's car was on level B2. Paul had dropped her off at the building entrance 2 hours earlier, and she'd sent him home when the meeting ran long. Because Paul had a wife who made dinner at 7:30, and Naomi was not willing to be the reason he missed it. She'd called for a car service instead. The app said 8 minutes. She stood near the elevator bank, back against the concrete column, and checked her phone. 7 minutes now. The garage was not empty. There were maybe 30 cars on B2, a handful of people moving between vehicles. The distant sound of a sedan pulling up the exit ramp. Normal, entirely normal. She shifted her bag to her other shoulder, adjusted the way the strap was cutting across her collarbone, and looked up from her phone. The man in the gray coat was standing at the far end of the row, directly across from her. He was not walking toward her. He was not walking away from her. He was standing with the absolute stillness of someone who has trained himself out of the habit of fidgeting. And he was looking at her with the kind of focused attention that had nothing casual about it. In the flat, even light of the fluorescence, she could see him more clearly than she'd been able to on Tuesday medium height, broad through the shoulders. The collar of the gray coat turned up against a chill that didn't exist down here. The lower half of his face was covered by a dark balaclava. His eyes, above it, were a pale, washed-out color that the harsh light made it difficult to name. Naomi did not move. This was her first instinct, always stillness before flight, assessment before reaction. She cataloged the distance between them. 40 feet, maybe 45. She cataloged the exits, the elevator bank behind her, the stairwell door 12 feet to her left, the vehicle exit ramp 30 feet to her right. She cataloged the other people in the garage. A woman in a business suit unlocking a black Audi 4 rows over. A man in his 60s walking toward the stairwell. Neither of them close enough to matter. The man in the gray coat took one step toward her, and then his phone rang. It was not a ringtone, it was a vibration. A small movement in his coat pocket that she could not possibly have seen from 40 feet away, but somehow registered in the shift of his posture when it happened. A micro-tension through his shoulders. He stopped walking. He stood there for 3 full seconds. And in those 3 seconds, something passed across his posture, not hesitation exactly. More like a calculation being run and coming back, with a result he hadn't anticipated. He turned and walked back toward the far end of the garage. Around the corner, gone. Naomi let out the breath she'd been holding in a long, controlled exhale. Her hands were completely steady. She found this interesting in a detached way that her body's response to threat had apparently become to go very still and very clear instead of to panic. She supposed 8 months of low-level fear had calibrated her nervous system for exactly this. Her phone buzzed. Driver arriving. Silver Tahoe. Plate ending 7,742. She pushed off the column and walked to the exit ramp without rushing, without looking back. But in the moment before, she turned the corner toward the ramp. She looked once more at the place where the man had been standing. On the ground beneath where his left hand had rested, against the hood of a parked car, there was a smear of something dark. She was too far away to be certain, and she was not going back to look. But it caught the fluorescent light in a way that suggested it was wet. And it occurred to her, as she walked up the ramp into the rain, that the man in the gray coat had a cut on his left hand, or a scar that had recently reopened, or something that left a mark on the hood of a stranger's parked car. She filed this away the way she filed everything. The dinner with the Aldridge family on Thursday evening was the kind of event that Naomi had learned to navigate the way a sailor learns to navigate a bay full of unmarked shoals through a combination of preparation, attention, and the understanding that one wrong move would not announce itself before it happened. The Aldridges were old money in the specific New York sense of the term, the kind of old money that had lasted long enough to develop opinions about new money that it expressed only through extremely subtle tonal adjustments. Walter Aldridge had gone to school with Dominic's father. His wife, Patricia, served on 3 charitable boards with the kind of women who still referred to their domestic staff as the help without irony. They met at a restaurant on the Upper East Side that didn't have a sign outside, just a number on the door. Brushed brass, and a maitre who recognized everyone worth recognizing. Naomi wore a midnight blue dress she'd had altered twice as her pregnancy progressed, and pearl drop earrings that had belonged to Dominic's grandmother, and which he'd given her on their first anniversary, and which she wore to events like this one, specifically because they signaled a legitimacy that her own background, solidly upper middle class. Boston, her father's money having largely evaporated in the last years of his life, did not automatically confer. She understood the game. She was good at the game. She just found it exhausting in a way she never admitted to anyone. Celeste Vane arrived 12 minutes after they did. Naomi registered this with a small, precise interior adjustment, the kind that doesn't show on the face. Celeste was not on the guest list Dominic had shared with her. Celeste was never on guest lists. She had a way of appearing at events as though she had always been expected, the way a cold front appears over a city, technically natural, technically explicable, and nonetheless distinctly unwelcome. Dominic. Celeste touched his arm when she reached them, a hand on the sleeve. Brief and proprietary. Walter called and mentioned the dinner. I hope it's all right that I came. The Aldridge Group has been looking at our Midtown acquisition, and Walter thought it might be useful to have me here. She smiled at Naomi. Naomi, you look wonderful. How are you feeling? Very well, Naomi said. You must be exhausted. The last few weeks are supposed to be the hardest. Celeste's eyes moved to Naomi's stomach with the specific calibrated sympathy of someone performing concern for an audience. I don't know how you manage. I manage fine, Naomi said pleasantly. Thank you. Celeste laughed softly and turned back to Dominic, and the dinner began. Naomi spent the next 2 hours doing what she'd always done at events like this, listening more than she spoke, watching what people revealed when they thought they were being observed by someone less intelligent than they were, tracking the specific dynamics between Dominic and Celeste that she'd been watching for months, and that had sharpened into something she could no longer pretend was professional warmth and shared work stress. It was the small things. The way Celeste angled her body toward Dominic across the table. The way Dominic occasionally used we in a context that should have meant himself and Naomi, but somehow meant himself and Celeste. The way Celeste said something quietly to him between the appetizer and the main course, and Dominic glanced at Naomi with an expression she recognized from their recent interactions, that careful, managed look. The one that meant he was holding something he hadn't decided to say. Naomi ate her dinner. She made conversation with Patricia Aldridge about the new wing at the Met. She laughed at the right moments. She gave nothing away. At one point, Walter Aldridge leaned across the table toward her and said, in the avuncular tone of a man who thought he was being kind, "You know, Naomi, there's a trust instrument in your name that Marcus Hale created before his passing. I helped him structure the estate filings. Actually, years back. Fascinating that it's never been touched. Do you know the conditions?" Naomi felt the table go very still around her, though nothing changed in anyone else's face. "I've only just begun to look into it," she said evenly. Walter nodded. apparently satisfied. "Worth understanding before the baby comes," he said. "Depending on the structure, the child's birth could trigger some significant activity." Marcus was quite thorough. He said this with the warmth of a man describing an old friend, and then moved on to something else. And Naomi kept her face exactly as it was, across the table. Celeste's hand had gone very still on her wine glass. Naomi noticed this. She noted it, and she stored it, and she let the dinner continue. In the car on the way home, Dominic was quiet for 6 blocks before he said, "Celeste mentioned that the accounting team flagged some additional transactions in the joint account." Celeste mentioned. Naomi said, I'm not accusing you of anything. Naomi, I just want to understand. What transactions?" "Specifically, transfers to an account that seems to be registered to a holding company. The amounts aren't large, but the pattern, Dominic." She turned to look at him. The city moved past the window behind him, wet and luminous. "What account? What holding company?" "I have had one financial advisor for 6 years, the same one I had before we were married, and our joint account has been reviewed annually by Gerald's office. If there are transfers you can't account for, they didn't originate with me." He was quiet. "Who showed you these statements?" she asked. "That's not who showed you." He looked out the window. "Celeste flagged them internally. She brought them to me privately because she didn't want it to become a company matter." The car was quiet except for the sound of rain on the roof and the swish of the wipers. Naomi looked at her husband's profile, the set of his jaw. The way he held his shoulders when he was defending a position he already suspected was wrong, and felt something settle in her chest that was not quite grief and not quite anger, but had the weight of both. "I see," she said. "I'm going to need you to review the supplemental agreement," Dominic said. "No," Naomi said. "Naomi, I will not sign a document that restricts my access to marital assets based on statements produced by the person who is sleeping with my husband." She said it quietly. She said it the way she said everything, clearly, and without theater. "When you're ready to have a real conversation, I'll be in the library." She looked back out her window. Dominic said nothing for the rest of the ride. Diana Chu called on Friday morning with the first piece of real information. Naomi was in the library, at the desk in the corner, with her laptop open and a cup of tea going cold beside it. She picked up on the first ring. "Okay," Diana said, without preamble. "The trust is real. It was created 22 years ago, which means you were 12 years old when your father set it up. The instrument is irrevocable and was funded with a combination of liquid assets and equity stakes in 2 companies, both of which have since been absorbed into larger holdings. The trust is administered through a fiduciary office in Boston." A pause. "Naomi, the value of the trust when it was established was approximately $7 million. With 22 years of growth, what's it worth now?" Naomi said. "The fiduciary office wouldn't give me current valuations without formal authorization from you. But based on the equity stakes and what I can trace publicly, we're talking somewhere north of 40 million. Naomi was quiet. "There's more," Diana said. "The triggering condition. I had to go through 2 layers of the instrument to find it, because it's structured in a specific way." Another pause, the kind that meant Diana was choosing her words carefully. "The trust distributes to you as a lump sum on one of 2 conditions: your 35th birthday, or the birth of your first child, whichever comes first. Upon distribution, a mandatory independent audit of the trust's management history is automatically initiated, An audit, Naomi said. A full review of every transaction, every management decision, every fee structure since the trust's inception. Whoever has been administering this trust for 22 years is about to have every financial decision they've made examined by an independent party whether they like it or not. Naomi put her free hand flat on the desk. Diana, can you find out who the beneficial trustee is? Not the fiduciary office, whoever has the real oversight authority. I can try. It'll take a few days. Diana's voice shifted slightly. Naomi, are you safe? Yes, Naomi said. Automatic. Clean. I'm asking because the kind of money we're talking about. With an audit triggered on a timeline, someone can calculate the baby is due in 6 weeks. Your 35th birthday is in 14 months. Anyone paying attention would know the clock is running. I know, Naomi said. So are you safe? A beat. I'm working on it, she said. That's the most honest answer I have. Diana exhaled. I'll call you when I have the trustee information. Naomi hung up. She looked at the laptop screen. She looked at the photograph on the shelf. $40 million and a mandatory audit. Marcus was quite thorough, Walter Aldridge had said, with the warmth of a man describing an old friend. She spent Saturday alone. Dominic was at the office. A meeting he'd scheduled without mentioning to her, and she did not ask what it was about. She used the time to work methodically through what she knew. She made a second legal pad. She mapped connections, the trust, the audit, the deadline, Celeste's reaction when Walter mentioned the trust at dinner, Celeste's stillness, the hand on the wine glass, the micropause before she resumed her conversation. Celeste knew about the trust. Celeste knew what the baby's birth would trigger. And Celeste had been building a case against Naomi for months. The fabricated bank statements, the emails Dominic had been shown that Naomi had still not seen, but which had produced that careful, wounded look on his face that meant whatever he'd read had done exactly what it was designed to do. The supplemental property agreement, structured to restrict Naomi's assets before the birth, which would complicate any automatic distribution from the trust. It was not a betrayal driven by jealousy, or not only that, it was a financial strategy. Naomi could see the architecture of it now, and the clarity of that vision, the sheer systematic intelligence behind what Celeste had built, sent a cold, quiet fury through her that she recognized immediately as the most useful emotion she possessed. She was still at the desk in the library when she heard it, a sound from the back hallway. Not Rosa. Rosa didn't come on Saturdays. Not Dominic. She'd have heard the front door. A small sound, the kind a person makes when they're trying not to make any sound at all and are almost succeeding. Naomi closed the laptop. She sat very still. She listened. The sound moved slowly, carefully from the back hallway toward the main corridor, toward the library. She looked at the room. The desk was in the corner. The door to the library was on the opposite wall, 8 feet away, standing half open. The window behind her overlooked 68th Street and was 12 stories up. There was a fireplace poker in the stand beside the cold fireplace, 4 feet to her left. She stood up, moved to the fireplace, and picked up the poker. She held it loosely, the way her father had taught her to hold a bat when she was 8 years old, loose in the fingers, tight on contact. She stood to the side of the doorway, back against the wall, and waited. The footsteps stopped outside the door. A long silence, 5 seconds. 7:10. Then the door moved. The man in the gray coat stepped into the library. He saw the room was empty. He took one more step in. His head turned, scanning. Professional. Quick, and then he turned toward the window. And as he did, Naomi stepped out from behind the door and put the fireplace poker against the back of his neck with enough pressure to make the point clear. "Don't," she said. He went completely still. Credit to him, there was no lurch, no defensive grab. He simply stopped moving, the way a man does when he's been trained for exactly this kind of encounter and knows that a sudden response is not in his interest. "Hands where I can see them," she said. He raised both hands, slowly, palms out, and Naomi looked at his left hand. There was a scar along the base of his left thumb, pale and curved, old and settled into the skin. The specific topography of an injury that had healed decades ago. A fishing hook accident. She was 6 years old in the memory, and she was standing on the dock at the Cape Cod house, and her father was unhooking a catch from the line, and the hook had slipped, and the sound he'd made. The poker dropped 3 inches. She caught herself. She reset it. "Turn around," she said. Her voice did not shake. She would not let it shake. "Naomi," he said. And the voice hit her like a physical thing, like a hand flat against the sternum, because it was her father's voice, worn down and roughed over and used differently. But underneath it, undeniably, structurally, his. "Turn around," she said again. Slowly, he turned. The balaclava covered the lower half of his face. Above it, his eyes were gray. The pale, washed-out gray she'd seen in the parking garage. And they were looking at her with an expression. She had no category for grief and horror, and something that was not quite relief but was adjacent to it. The look of a man who has been dreading a specific moment for years and has just arrived at it. She reached out with her free hand and pulled the balaclava down. 20 years. 20 years since she'd last seen him at 32, which meant she was now looking at a face she'd never known older, harder, marked by whatever the last 2 decades had been, with a beard cropped close and lines around the eyes she didn't recognize. But the architecture was the same. The jaw, the way his mouth set when he was trying not to show something. "Dad," she said. The word came out completely flat, because she had nothing else. Marcus Hale closed his eyes. "I know," he said. "I know." The fireplace poker was still in her hand. She did not put it down. Chapter 3. The papers don't lie. But people do. She did not put the poker down for a long time. That was the detail she would remember later, not the words, not the expression on his face, not the way the library light fell across features she'd spent 8 years trying to forget. She would remember that she stood in her own home, 8 months pregnant, holding a fireplace poker against the chest of the man who had raised her, and that she did not feel the urge to drop it. She felt the urge to hold it exactly where it was, because the poker was real and solid and made of something she understood, and the man standing in front of her was none of those things. "You have 30 seconds, she said, "to give me one reason not to call the police." "I have documents," Marcus said. His voice was controlled, but she could hear what was underneath the control, a tremor that wasn't fear. Exactly, something older than fear. "In a case, in the service stairwell 2 floors down. Everything you need to understand what's happening to you, and why and who is behind it. I put them there before I came up. You broke into my home. Yes, you've been following me for at least 4 days. 6, he said. Since I got the contract." The word landed in the room like something dropped from a height. "Say that again," Naomi said. His jaw tightened. "I was given a job through a network I've worked in for the last several years. The target information came through the standard channel. Photograph. Address, schedule. He looked at her steadily. I didn't know the target was you until the parking garage on Tuesday. When I saw your face, the room was very quiet. Outside, 68th Street went about its afternoon. A cab honked somewhere below. Naomi was aware of the baby moving that slow underwater roll, and she pressed her free hand flat against her side and breathed. You were going to kill me, she said. I stopped. Before or after you decided I was your daughter? The question landed exactly as she intended it to. Marcus Hale looked at her like a man absorbing a blow he has decided he deserves, and said nothing for a moment. The moment I saw your face, he said finally. I stopped the moment I saw your face. And if I'd looked different, she said, if I'd cut my hair, if it was dark and you hadn't been sure. Naomi, that's not a rhetorical question. He held her gaze. I don't know, he said, and I understand if that's not good enough. She looked at him for a long moment. The man she'd grown up watching move through the world with a particular brand of confident warmth, the kind of father who showed up to her debate tournaments and remembered the names of her friends and always had an answer, had been replaced by someone leaner and more careful, someone who had learned to take up less space. She had spent 8 years grieving a version of this man that apparently had never fully existed. The poker was getting heavy. She lowered it to her side. But she didn't put it back in the stand. Get the documents, she said, and then you're going to tell me everything. Start to finish. Leave nothing out. And if I find one single thing that doesn't match what you're telling me tonight, I will call the police myself, and I will tell them exactly what you just told me about the contract. Do you understand? Yes, Marcus said. Go. He was back in 11 minutes. She'd used the time to text Diana. Need you on standby tonight. Might have something significant. Will call. Then she'd gone to the kitchen and made 2 cups of tea, because her hands needed something to do, and because making tea was the most aggressively normal thing she could think of. And normal was the only counterweight she had against the sensation that the floor had shifted 3 inches to the left and was not planning to shift back. She heard him come back through the service door. He appeared in the kitchen doorway with a gray nylon case compact, the kind of bag that could pass for gym equipment or camera gear, and stood there as if waiting for permission to enter his own daughter's kitchen, which, Naomi reflected, was technically exactly the situation. Sit down, she said. She set one of the cups on the far side of the table and kept the other for herself, and sat with her back to the wall, facing the door. Old habit. She'd developed it in the months after he disappeared, when she'd lived for a while with the low-level feeling that something bad was coming, and she wanted to see it when it arrived. Marcus sat. He set the case on the table between them. He did not open it yet. Start from the beginning, Naomi said. The real beginning. He looked at the case for a moment. Then he looked at her. 23 years ago, he said, I went into business with a man named Garrett Vane. She listened without interrupting for 40 minutes. She had always been a good listener. It was one of the things her professors had noted in law school, that she had the rare ability to hear an argument completely before formulating a response, to hold an entire structure in her mind without the need to immediately challenge any piece of it. She used that ability now. She listened to her father explain how Garrett Vane, who had started as his partner and become his closest friend, had spent 3 years systematically moving assets through a series of shell companies Marcus had co-signed for. companies he believed were legitimate investment vehicles to conceal what was functionally a multi-year fraud against their institutional investors. She listened to him explain how Garrett had built the trail specifically to make Marcus look like the architect. How, when the regulators began asking questions, Garrett had come to Marcus privately, not with apologies, but with a proposition: disappear, or face criminal prosecution for fraud Marcus had not committed but could not disprove. And further, if Marcus refused, Garrett would make certain that the investigation expanded to encompass every financial connection Marcus had, including the education fund he'd set up for Naomi, including the trust he'd created for her future children. "You'll spend the next 10 years in court," Garrett had told him. "And by the time it's over, your daughter will be 35 and broke and radioactive by association." She listened to Marcus explain that he'd had 24 hours to decide, and that he'd made the wrong one, that he'd chosen to disappear a staged death, facilitated by people in a network he was ashamed to name, because he told himself it was the only way to protect her, that he'd been telling himself this for 8 years, that somewhere around year 3 he'd stopped believing it and started knowing that he'd done it because he was afraid, and that protecting Naomi was the story he'd built around the fear to make it livable. She listened to all of it. When he finished, she said, "The trust, I set it up before I left," he said. "I couldn't take the liquid assets." Garrett was watching everything, but the equity stakes in 2 early companies were held in structures complex enough that he couldn't easily access them without triggering disclosure requirements. "I put them in the trust, irrevocable, so neither Garrett nor anyone he controlled could touch the principal." He paused. "The audit condition was deliberate. When the trust distributes when you have a child, or when you turn 35, every transaction in the trust's history gets reviewed by an independent party. Everything Garrett or anyone connected to him has done with the adjacent accounts comes to light. He's been siphoning from it," Naomi said. "Not from the principal, he couldn't touch that, but the management fees, the administrative accounts, the investment vehicles surrounding the trust, yes, for years. It's not a small amount." And Celeste. Marcus's expression shifted slightly. "Celeste Vane is Garrett's daughter. She's known about the trust since she was old enough to understand her father's business. She knows that when your baby is born, the audit begins. She knows what the audit will find." Naomi was quiet for a moment. She looked at her cup of tea. She thought about Celeste at the dinner table, her hand going still on the wine glass when Walter Aldridge mentioned the trust. She thought about the fabricated bank statements, the emails shown to Dominic, the supplemental property agreement designed to complicate the trust distribution. She thought about the contract the word Marcus had used, the matter-of-fact way he'd said it. "I was given a job," and she felt the cold fury from earlier return, cleaner and sharper now, with a clear target. "Open the case," she said. Marcus unzipped the gray nylon bag. He took out a series of manila folders, each labeled in a small, precise handwriting she recognized as his. She'd grown up watching him label files this way, at the desk in his home office, the same desk where he'd helped her with geometry homework and gone over her college applications and set them on the table. "Original incorporation documents for 6 of the shell companies," he said, touching each folder in turn. "Communications between Garrett and the administrative office he used to create them. I kept copies before I left. Physical copies. which is why they still exist. Wire transfer records showing movement between the shell accounts and Garrett's personal holdings. He set a thumb drive on the table. Digital records. Same material. Encrypted. The decryption key is in the last folder. Naomi picked up the first folder and opened it. She read the first document. She read the second. The documents were exactly what he'd said they were. She could see the structure of the fraud in the first 3 pages alone. She'd spent 4 years doing corporate litigation. And the architecture of what Garrett Vane had built was both sophisticated and, to a trained eye, unmistakable. The shell companies were layered, but not infinitely so. The paper trail existed. Marcus had preserved it. Why now, she said, without looking up from the folder. You had these for 8 years. Why didn't you surface? Because surfacing meant facing charges I couldn't disprove without Garrett's cooperation. And Garrett had no reason to cooperate. His story worked. Mine required documentation that, without the original company records, I couldn't independently verify. He paused. And because I was a coward. I've already told you that. She looked up. I'm not asking for a confession. I'm asking tactically. What changed? He held her gaze. The contract changed. When I found out who I'd been sent to kill, everything else became secondary. Another pause. And because your baby is coming. 6 weeks. Maybe less. The audit clock is running. Celeste is moving. And if I don't surface with these documents now, while there's still time to build a case before the birth. You think she'll try again, Naomi said. I think she already is, Marcus said. I removed myself from the contract network the moment I identified you. That means she'll find another contractor, or she'll find another method. Celeste didn't get where she is by having one plan. Naomi closed the folder. She looked at her father across the kitchen table of the apartment where she'd been building a life with a man who was currently at his office being managed by Celeste Vane's very long and very careful hands. And she made a decision. Not about forgiveness. Not about the 8 years. Not about the body she'd identified or believed she'd identified, and the 4 days she'd spent barely eating in her apartment afterward. Those were real things, and they would have to be dealt with. But they were not tonight's problem. Tonight's problem was specific and had a specific solution, and Naomi had always worked better when the problem was specific. You can't stay here, she said. Dominic will be home in a few hours. And I'm not ready to. That's a different conversation. I need you to go somewhere safe with the originals. Make copies of everything and get them to a second location. She reached across the table and picked up the thumb drive. I'm keeping this. Naomi, I need you to trust me to do this correctly, she said, which I recognize is an uncomfortable position for you, given the circumstances. His jaw moved. Where do you want me to go? Does Garrett Vane know you're alive? No, as far as he knows. The contractor he hired is still active. Good. Keep it that way. She picked up her phone. I'm going to give you a number. A lawyer, she's the best I know. And she owes me 3 favors. And I'm calling all of them tonight. You call her, and you go wherever she tells you to go. And you do not contact me again until I reach out first. Can you do that? Yes. She looked at him one more time across the table. The scar on his hand. The face she'd known and the face she didn't. The distance between the two. You should know, she said, that I haven't decided anything yet about any of it. I'm using you right now because you're useful, and the documents are real. And my child's life is more important than my feelings about your choices. But don't mistake utility for forgiveness. Marcus Hale looked at his daughter with an expression that held no argument. I know, he said quietly. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Good, she said. Then we understand each other. She dialed Diana's number. Dominic came home at 9 o'clock to find Naomi in the library with the desk lamp on, a legal pad covered in her handwriting, and the particular quality of stillness around her that he had come to recognize as not peace, but concentration. The look she got when she was working through something complex. The look she used to bring home from the office in the early years of their marriage, when she was still at the firm and would sometimes work at the library desk until midnight. He stood in the doorway for a moment before she looked up. I made soup, she said. It's on the stove. He came into the room. He looked at the legal pad without being able to read it from where he stood. Were you working? Thinking, she said. He sat in the chair across from her, the reading chair, the one he used on Sunday mornings when he wasn't at the office, which lately had been less frequently than it once was. He sat in it with the particular posture of a man who is trying to seem at ease and isn't quite managing it. And Naomi looked at him and thought about everything she knew and everything he didn't know, and the very specific distance between those two bodies of information. I owe you an explanation, he said. Yes, she said. You do. He was quiet for a moment. The thing Celeste showed me, I know how it sounds. That I would look at something she brought to me, and he stopped. Tried again. My first wife left. You know that. She left with information that she'd been collecting for a year, financial records, communications, and I didn't see it because I didn't let myself see it. Because seeing it meant admitting I'd been wrong about someone I'd trusted completely. He looked at the floor. When Celeste showed me the statements, I reacted to the shape of the situation before I thought about the source. I know that's not sufficient. Naomi looked at her husband. He was not a stupid man. He was not a cruel man. He was a man with a specific wound in a specific place. And Celeste had found that wound with the precision of someone who had been looking for exactly it, and had used it without hesitation. The statements are fabricated, Naomi said. The emails are fabricated. There is no holding company, no unknown man. What there is a $40 million trust in my name that will trigger a mandatory audit the moment our baby is born. That audit will expose financial crimes committed by Garrett Vane over a period of 20-plus years. Celeste Vane is Garrett's daughter. She has been working to prevent that audit from occurring, which means she has been working to prevent our child from being born. She kept her voice level, factual. She gave you fabricated evidence so that you would restrict my assets before the birth, which would legally complicate the trust distribution. She has been systematically building a case for your distrust of me because a husband who already suspects his wife asks fewer questions when his wife turns up dead. The last sentence landed in the room the way she meant it to, clear and clean, and with the full weight of what it meant. Dominic's face went through several things in rapid succession. What do you mean when she turns up dead? He said. I mean that someone hired a contractor to ensure I don't make it to my delivery date, Naomi said. And I mean that Celeste Vane is the person who hired them. The room was very quiet. Naomi, Dominic said, and his voice had changed completely. The management, the careful control, the practiced equilibrium of a man running a billion-dollar company. All of it stripped away, leaving something rawer and less composed underneath. How long have you known? I've been building the picture for about a week, she said. I have the full shape of it now. She paused. And I have evidence. Not from Celeste fabricated files. Real evidence. Original documents. From where? She looked at him steadily. I'm not ready to answer that yet, but I will be. Soon. She picked up her pen. What I need to know right now, Dominic, is whether you are going to be useful to me or whether you are going to be another complication I have to manage. He looked at her across the lamplit library at the woman he had married, who was carrying his child and had apparently spent the last week quietly building a legal and evidentiary case while he was in Chicago, being handed a carefully engineered lie. And she watched him work through something in himself, something that was visibly difficult, something that had to do with pride and fear and the specific cost of admitting that he had failed her in a way that had put her in danger. Tell me what you need, he said. I need you to call Gerald Fitch first thing tomorrow and tell him to suspend the supplemental agreement indefinitely, she said. And I need you to continue behaving normally around Celeste. Don't signal that anything has changed. Can you do that? Yes. And I need you to understand that I am handling this, she said. I need your cooperation. I don't need your rescue. Something crossed his face, not offense. Something more complicated. I understand, he said. Good. She made a note on the legal pad. Go eat the soup. It's the butternut squash one. Rosa left it Friday. He stood. He moved toward the door. Then he stopped. Naomi. He didn't turn around immediately. I'm sorry. I know it's not enough. But I need to say it. She kept her eyes on the legal pad. I know you are, she said. Go eat. He went. She listened to his footsteps in the hallway. The sound of the kitchen door. The small domestic sounds of a man lifting a lid from a pot on the stove. She put her pen down. She looked at the photograph on the shelf, her father's hand on her shoulder, the scar. Then she picked the pen back up, turned to a fresh page on the legal pad, and wrote at the top, in clean capital letters, what Celeste does when she finds out the contractor is gone. Because Celeste would find out. And when she did, she wouldn't fold. She would pivot. And the pivot would be fast, and it would be smart. And Naomi needed to know what it looked like before it arrived. She pressed her palm against her stomach. The baby shifted, turned, pressed back. I know, Naomi said quietly. Almost there. She bent back over the legal pad and kept writing. 2 miles south, in a suite on the 41st floor of a hotel on 53rd Street. Celeste Vane sat at a glass desk with her laptop open and her phone face up beside it, and waited for a message that was not coming. The contractor had gone silent 48 hours ago. This was not normal. The network she'd used had a communication protocol, brief, coded, reliable. Silence of this duration meant one of 3 things. The contractor had been compromised. The contractor had been arrested. Or the contractor had chosen to walk away from the contract. The first 2 she could manage. The third was the problem. Because a contractor who walked away was a contractor who had a reason. And a reason meant a story. And a story meant exposure. She picked up her phone and opened a contact listed only as a string of numbers. She typed 4 words. Status on current contract. She set the phone down. She stood and walked to the window. 53rd Street ran below her in its usual nighttime configuration, cabs and pedestrians and the particular orange glow of the streetlights that made Manhattan look, from high enough up, like something that had been lit intentionally, like a set. Her phone buzzed. She picked it up. Read the response. Contractor removed himself. Contract terminated. No further action possible through this channel. Celeste stood very still. She typed, "Why?" The response came in less than a minute. Personal conflict of interest identified with target. Non-negotiable withdrawal. She read it twice. Then she set the phone down on the glass desk with great care. The way you set something down when your hands are doing something. Your face is not showing. Personal conflict of interest with the target. She thought about that for a moment. She thought about what kind of conflict of interest caused a professional to walk away from a paid contract. She thought about Naomi Hale, her file, her history. The background check Celeste had run 18 months ago when she'd first started planning this. Thorough as any corporate due diligence. She thought about Marcus Hale, whose death had been listed as confirmed 8 years ago, and whose estate had produced a trust instrument that Celeste had been managing the edges of ever since. A contractor who had a personal conflict of interest with a woman named Naomi Hale. The thought arrived fully formed, and Celeste recognized it for exactly what it was: a catastrophic variable she had not accounted for. She opened her laptop. She pulled up a contact in her private directory that she had not used in 11 months, a name connected to a very different set of services. More direct, less traceable, significantly more expensive. She did not have time to go back to the beginning. She had 6 weeks, maybe less, before Naomi's child was born and the audit clock started running. She needed a solution that did not involve a contractor who might, at this moment, be sitting across a kitchen table from her target and explaining everything. She needed a new plan, and she needed it before morning. Chapter 4. Dad, the call came at 6:47 in the morning. Naomi was already awake. She'd been awake since 4, which was becoming standard for the 3rd trimester. Her body apparently having decided that sleep was a luxury inconsistent with the final weeks of pregnancy. She was in the kitchen with the chamomile tea and the legal pad and the particular mental clarity that comes early morning and no distractions. Working through the timing sequence she'd been constructing since the night before, what needed to happen, in what order. Before the baby came, the legal pad had 3 pages of notes now, organized in the precise hierarchical structure she'd developed in law school and never quite stopped using, even after she left the firm. Her phone lit up. "Diana, tell me you have the trustee information," Naomi said. "Better," Diana said. "I have the trustee information and something else." A brief pause, the kind Diana used when she was deciding how to sequence a set of facts. The trust is administered through the Alderton Fiduciary Group in Boston. Standard institutional trustee setup. Nothing unusual on the surface. But the oversight authority, the person with actual decision-making power over the trust's investment strategy and management fees, is held by a private individual, not the institution who. The oversight authority is assigned to a holding company called Meridian Capital Partners, incorporated in Delaware 14 years ago. The registered agent is a man named Richard Harlow. Another pause. Richard Harlow is an alias. I ran the incorporation documents against some older SEC filings, cross-referenced the signature structure, and ran it by a forensic document person I use. Diana's voice was careful now. The way it got when she was delivering information she knew would land hard. "Naomi, the principal behind Meridian Capital Partners is Garrett Vane." Naomi set down her pen. "He gave himself oversight authority over my trust. He gave himself oversight authority over the investment decisions, which means he controlled where the trust's assets were allocated. And if he was directing those assets toward vehicles he also controlled. He's been collecting management fees from both sides, Naomi said, using my trust capital to fund his own investment structures and charging the trust for the privilege. That's my read. Over 22 years, on a $40 million principal, with the kind of fee structures I'm seeing in the fiduciary documents, Naomi. The number is significant. We're not talking about skimming. We're talking about a long-term systematic extraction. Naomi was quiet for a moment. The kitchen was still dark except for the lamp above the stove. And outside the window, the city was in the specific gray-blue state it reached in the hour before dawn. Not quite night and not quite morning. Everything held in suspension. Can you build a case from what you have? From what I have, I can build a strong civil case for criminal exposure. I'd need the original transaction records, the wire transfers, the shell company documentation, the kind of material that would have been in Vane's own files before he cleaned them up. A pause. Do you have access to anything like that? I might, Naomi said. Give me 24 hours. She hung up and sat for a moment with her hands around the tea mug. Then she picked up the second phone, the prepaid one she'd bought with cash on Friday. A precaution she decided was not excessive given the circumstances, and sent a single text to the number Marcus had given her before he left. I need the originals delivered to Diana Chu's office today. All of them. She's expecting you. Go directly there. Do not contact me until I reach out. The response came in 4 minutes. Understood. She put the prepaid phone in the drawer beneath the silverware, under the good tablecloths. Rosa pressed and stacked every month with a precision that suggested she found it genuinely satisfying. Then she picked up the regular phone and opened Dominic's contact and typed, "We need to talk before you go in today. Don't contact Celeste until we've spoken." His response came immediately, which meant he'd been awake too. "I'll be in the kitchen in 10 minutes. Dominic made eggs. This was not something he did often. The kitchen was Rosa's domain, and he treated it with the respectful distance of a man who understood. He was a guest in someone's practice this morning with a focused practicality that Naomi recognized as his version of doing something with his hands while his mind worked. He made eggs and toast and set a plate in front of her and sat across the table with his own coffee. And she told him what Diana had found. She told him about Garrett Vane's oversight authority. She told him about Meridian Capital Partners and Richard Harlow and the 22-year extraction from the trust. She told him about the mandatory audit that her child's birth would trigger and what that audit would expose. She did not yet tell him about the documents or about Marcus, because those were two separate conversations, and this morning she only had the bandwidth for one. Dominic listened the way he listened in boardrooms, very still, very focused, with the particular attention of a man who processes information spatially, who is building a structure in his head as you speak, and checking each new piece against the framework already there. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Celeste has been at Hale Group for 4 years, he said. Yes. She would have had access to our financial disclosures, the estate documents. She would have known about the trust from our own filings. Yes, he looked at his coffee. She's been planning this since before she took the job. That's my read, Naomi said. The job was the plan. Getting close enough to you was the strategy. The financial case against me was the endgame. She paused. She's very good at what she does. I want to be clear about that. She built something sophisticated, and she built it over years, and she nearly made it work. Dominic looked up. Nearly, Naomi said. He was quiet again. She watched him work through something, not just the facts, but the implications behind the facts, the specific shape of how thoroughly he had been used. She knew this look. She'd seen it in opposing counsel at the firm, in witnesses who just understood exactly how badly they'd been outmaneuvered. It was the look of a man recalibrating. "What do you need from me today?" he said. "Nothing yet. Go to the office. Behave normally. If Celeste brings up the supplemental agreement, tell her Gerald is reviewing some language and it'll be ready by end of week. Buy time. Don't give her anything to react to." He nodded. He stood up and carried his cup to the counter. Then he turned around. "Naomi, the contractor. You said someone hired." He stopped. Started again. "Are you safe? Right now, today, are you physically safe?" She looked at him. "I'm taking precautions. That's not what I asked." "I know it's not." She met his eyes. "I believe the immediate threat has been neutralized. I believe Celeste is currently recalibrating, which means she's not yet moved to a backup plan. That gives us a window." A pause. "But I need you to understand that the window is not large, and I need everything to move in the next 72 hours. Tell me the moment you need me to act," he said, "whatever it is." She looked at him across the kitchen at the person she'd married, who had failed her in a specific way and knew it, who was sitting with that knowledge without trying to minimize it or argue his way around it, and felt something shift in the architecture of the last 2 weeks. Not resolution, not forgiveness, just the recognition that he was here, now, and that here and now was what she had to work with. "I will," she said. Gerald Fitch called at 10:15 to say the supplemental agreement had been suspended, per Dominic's instruction, pending further review of some definitional language in Clause 7. He said this in the tone of a man who had been given a cover story he found professionally adequate and was deploying it without embellishment. Naomi thanked him and asked him to pull the full history of the trust instrument, every filing, every amendment, every trustee communication on record, and have it on her desk by end of business. "Of course." "Mrs. Hale," Gerald said, "may I ask what's prompted the review?" "Due diligence," Naomi said. "Given the timing." "Of course," Gerald said again, and hung up, and probably spent the next 30 seconds looking at his ceiling. Diana called at 11:30. "A man came in this morning," she said, "with a gray nylon case and enough documentation to make me genuinely concerned about my blood pressure. I've spent the last 2 hours going through it." A pause. "Naomi, this is comprehensive. These are original documents, wire transfers, incorporation records, communications with a clear evidentiary chain. If even 70% of this holds up to forensic authentication." "It will hold up," Naomi said. "Who is this person?" "A beat. Someone who has a personal stake in seeing this resolved." "He wouldn't tell me his name," Diana said. "He said to tell you that the second set of copies is in a safe deposit box in Boston, and gave me the bank and box number." Another pause. "Naomi, I've been doing this for 12 years. I know what it looks like when someone has been living with documents for a very long time, waiting for the right moment to use them. Whoever this man is, he's been carrying this for years." "I know," Naomi said. "Are you going to tell me who he is?" "Soon," Naomi said. "Not yet." After she hung up, she sat for a moment with both hands on her stomach. The baby was quiet today, a different kind of movement, slower, more deliberate, as if it too was conserving energy for something upcoming. She had read that babies in the final weeks often grew quieter as they ran out of room, and she found this oddly apt. Almost there, she thought. Just hold on a little longer. She met Marcus at Diana's office at 2 in the afternoon. Diana had cleared everyone else from the conference room. It was just the three of them at the long mahogany table, with the documents spread out and Diana's annotated notes arranged in the systematic way that meant she'd already begun building the case architecture. Marcus sat at one end of the table. Naomi sat at the other. Diana sat in the middle, which, Naomi thought, was probably the most accurate spatial representation of the situation available. I need to know one thing before we go further, Naomi said to Marcus. When you removed yourself from the contract and decided to come to me, did you consider the possibility that I wouldn't use the documents, that I'd turn you in instead? Marcus looked at her steadily. Yes, and I decided it didn't matter. You needed the documents either way. What you decided to do with me afterward wasn't the point. She looked at him for a moment. That's the first thing you've said to me in 20 years that sounds like the person I remember. He didn't look away. I know. Diana cleared her throat with the diplomatic timing of a woman who had navigated several difficult conversations in this room. I've authenticated the physical documents to my satisfaction, the paper stock, the printing methods. The signature characteristics are all consistent with the stated dates. I'll want a forensic document specialist to provide formal confirmation. But my preliminary read is that these are genuine originals. She looked at her notes. The evidentiary chain is strong. The wire transfer records directly connect Garrett Vane's personal accounts to the shell companies. The shell company incorporation documents show his signature on the founding documents, which directly contradicts the public record he established. She set down her pen. If we bring this to the right office, we can have a preliminary fraud investigation opened within 48 hours. The question is which office and in what sequence. Federal, Naomi said. Financial Crimes Division. We want this above the state level from the start. Garrett Vane has had 22 years to build relationships in New York. Agreed, Diana said. I have a contact at the U.S. Attorney's office, a good one. Someone who won't sit on this. She looked at Marcus. The complication is you. Whoever you are, you've been operating under a false identity for 8 years. The moment you surface with these documents, you surface as yourself. And that raises questions about why you were absent and what you were doing in the interim. Marcus looked at his hands on the table. The scar on his left thumb caught the afternoon light. I understand that. The network you mentioned, the one through which the contract was issued, how much exposure do you have there? Enough to be uncomfortable, Marcus said. Not enough to be disqualifying. I think, if I cooperate fully and can demonstrate that I was operating under ongoing duress from Vane's original threat, that's a conversation I'll need to have with my own counsel before you do anything, Diana said. But it's not insurmountable. She looked at Naomi. His testimony corroborating the documents will significantly strengthen the case. His presence is, frankly, the difference between a civil action and a criminal prosecution. I know, Naomi said. She looked at Marcus. You understand what surfacing means, fully, publicly, under your real name. Yes, he said. The fraud charges Vane set up, even if we prove they were fabricated. That process takes time. Investigations, hearings. Your name will be in the public record again. Everything you've avoided for 8 years becomes visible. I know, Marcus said. And Celeste will know you're alive. She'll know you're the contractor who walked. She'll know you came to me. Yes, that makes you a target too. I'm aware. He looked at her across the conference table with an expression she was beginning to recognize as his current-day version of the composure she'd known when she was a child, steadier, harder, stripped of its warmth by years of consequence. Naomi, I am not asking you to protect me. I am not asking you for anything. I came here because it was the right thing to do and because it was approximately 8 years overdue. And whatever happens to me on the other side of it is proportionate to the choices I made. A pause. But I need you to know the trust, the documents, the audit. None of that is why I stopped. I stopped because I looked at your face in that parking garage and I could not do it. That's the only part of this that I don't have any complicated feelings about. The rest of it, his voice did something. A small structural shift that he controlled quickly. The rest of it I will spend a long time accounting for. The conference room was very quiet. Diana, to her credit, was looking at her notes. Naomi looked at her father across the mahogany table. She thought about the photograph in the library, the Cape Cod dock, the summer she was 9, the scar on his hand. She thought about the 4 days she'd spent alone in her apartment after the funeral home and the paperwork. She thought about all the specific moments over 8 years when something had happened graduating from law school, passing the bar, meeting Dominic. Every single day of this pregnancy, and he had not been there. And she had built herself into the kind of person who didn't need him to be there, because the alternative was too costly. She thought about the baby. Not in the abstract future child way she sometimes thought about the baby, but specifically the weight of it, the presence. The fact that in 6 weeks or less there would be a person in the world who had Marcus Hale's blood and didn't yet know what that meant. Okay, she said. Marcus looked at her. We do this correctly, she said. Diana coordinates with her contact at the U.S. Attorney's Office. You surface formally, under your real name, with the documents. You cooperate fully. We do not move until Diana says the case is structured correctly. She paused. And you do not, under any circumstances, contact Dominic directly. That conversation goes through me. Understood, Marcus said. One more thing. She held his gaze. When this is over, when the case is filed and Celeste is contained and the audit is running, you and I are going to have a different conversation. Not tonight, not this week, but we're going to have it. His expression did not change, but something shifted in it, a small, fractional movement, like a window opening in a closed room. I'll be there, he said, whenever you're ready. Good. She looked at Diana. What do we need to do in the next 24 hours? Diana outlined the sequence. Naomi took notes. Marcus sat quietly and answered questions when Diana directed them at him. And Naomi noticed that he was careful never to address her directly unless she addressed him first, a discipline she hadn't asked for, but recognized as a kind of respect, the acknowledgement that she was setting the terms and he would abide by them. They were in the conference room for 2 hours. By 4 o'clock, Diana had the framework of the filing structure ready and a call scheduled with her contact at the U.S. Attorney's Office for 8 the following morning. Marcus left through the back of the building at Diana's insistence. Diana had a paranoid streak about building exits that had apparently served her well over the years, with instructions to remain at the address she'd arranged and to speak to no one until she told him otherwise. Naomi took the elevator down to the lobby and stood on the sidewalk outside Diana's building on Madison Avenue and let the October air hit her face and tried to organize herself. She was standing there when her phone rang. Not the prepaid, the regular one. A number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer. And then she looked at the area code 617, Boston, and picked up Mrs. Hale. A man's voice, older, formal. "This is Charles Alderton, of the Alderton Fiduciary Group. I apologize for contacting you directly. I received a call this morning from a Ms. Diana Chu about the trust instrument, and I've spent the last several hours reviewing our records." A pause. "I want you to know that I became aware approximately 18 months ago that something in the management structure of your trust was not consistent with the original instrument. I raised concerns internally and was told it had been resolved. I should have escalated. I didn't, and I am calling to apologize for that, and to tell you that I will cooperate fully with any inquiry." Naomi stood very still on the Madison Avenue sidewalk while people moved past her in both directions. "Mr. Alderton," she said, "I appreciate you calling. Please speak with Diana Chu directly. She's coordinating the formal process. Tell her everything you just told me." "Yes, of course," he said. "Mrs. Hale, I'm sorry. For what it's worth something," Naomi said. "Call Diana." She hung up. She stood there for another moment, her hand flat against her stomach. The city moving around her with its usual magnificent indifference to any individual's crisis. The light on Madison's was going gold late afternoon. The particular October gold that made even Manhattan look briefly gentle. She thought about Celeste, in her suite on 53rd Street, opening a laptop and reaching for a contact she hadn't used in 11 months. She thought about the window Diana had mentioned, 48 hours, maybe less, before Celeste found a new angle. She thought about Dominic in his office right now, doing the things she'd asked him to do, holding the line she'd given him, trusting her to know what she was doing. She thought about Marcus walking out the back of Diana's building with 8 years of documents in a gray nylon case and nowhere particular to be. Then she took a breath and called Paul. "I need you to pick me up on Madison," she said when he answered. "And Paul, on the way home, can we go through the park? The long way." "Of course, Mrs. Hale," Paul said, in the voice of a man who had been driving long enough to know when someone needed 20 extra minutes to think. "Thank you," she said. It was nearly 6 when the car turned onto 68th Street, and Naomi was looking at her phone, a text from Diana. Brief and very Diana. "Call scheduled. Documents with forensics. Clock is running our way. Get some rest. You're going to need it," when Paul said, in a different tone than any she'd heard from him in 11 years. "Mrs. Hale." She looked up. There was a woman on the steps of the building, not standing in the lobby, waiting to be buzzed up, standing on the exterior steps, in a black coat, with no bag, in the early evening cold, in the specific attitude of someone who has been waiting for a while and has decided to be visible about it. In the glow of the building's entrance lights, the woman's face was completely composed, no performance of urgency, no performance of distress, just the face of someone who has made a decision and arrived at the place where the decision leads. Celeste Vane. Naomi looked at her through the car window. Celeste looked back. "Should I call someone?" Paul said quietly. Naomi watched Celeste's face, watched the composure, watched the calculation running behind it. The same calculation she'd seen across dinner tables and conference rooms, the real-time assessment of angles and leverage, of what is known and what is not known, of how to read the situation and reposition accordingly. Celeste did not yet know about Marcus. She did not yet know about the documents. What she knew was that her contractor had walked, and that Naomi was still alive, and that she was running out of time. She had come here to Naomi's front door, in person, with no legal cover and no professional buffer, because she was recalibrating in real time and she needed to know what Naomi knew, which meant she was afraid, which meant the leverage had shifted. "No," Naomi said. "It's all right, Paul." She opened the car door. "Wait here." She stepped out onto 68th Street and walked toward the steps, and Celeste watched her come, and neither of them looked away. "Celeste," Naomi said, when she reached the bottom of the steps. Her voice was perfectly even. Her hands were still. "Naomi." Celeste's voice was the same boardroom tone, measured, controlled, carrying the authority of someone who has done their homework. But underneath it, in the specific micro-tension around her eyes, something was running that hadn't been there at the Thursday dinner. "I think we should talk." "I think you're right," Naomi said. "But not tonight." Celeste's eyes moved quick, assessing to Naomi's face, her posture, the car behind her, the building entrance, the street, reading everything. "Naomi, whatever you think you know, I know enough," Naomi said. "And tomorrow I'll know more. And the day after that. So will a number of other people, in offices that have nothing to do with either of us." She held Celeste's gaze. "Tonight, I'm going upstairs, and I'm going to eat dinner and sleep, because I am 34 weeks pregnant and I have a significant amount of work to do in the next 2 days, and I need my rest." She paused. "I'd suggest you use the time to speak to a lawyer." Something moved across Celeste's face, not quite fear, not quite anger. Something in the narrow space between calculation and the first recognition that the calculation may have failed. Her mouth opened. "Good night, Celeste," Naomi said. She walked past her, up the steps, and through the front door of her building without looking back. In the elevator, going up, she let out a slow breath. Her hands were completely steady. She watched them in the mirrored elevator door and thought about that, the steadiness. The way her body had apparently committed to this particular response and was not going to change it now. The elevator opened on 12. She walked down the hall to the front door of the apartment. She unlocked it. She stepped inside. She stood in the foyer for a moment, the apartment quiet and warm. The smell of the good soap Rosa used on the floors. The small table lamp in the hallway that she always left on, and she pressed both palms flat against her stomach and stood there in the near dark and simply breathed. Then she picked up her phone and called Dominic. "I'm home," she said, when he picked up. "Come home as soon as you can, and stop by the front desk on your way in. Make sure the building manager knows that Celeste Vane is not to be admitted to the building under any circumstances. Starting tonight." A beat. "What happened?" "She came here," Naomi said. "She's scared, which means she's about to do something, and I'd rather she not have access to our lobby when she does." She paused. "Everything is in motion. Dominic, the documents are with Diana. We have a call with the U.S. Attorney's office in the morning. Come home." A brief silence. "I'm leaving now," he said. She hung up. She put the phone in her pocket. She went to the kitchen and stood at the counter and looked out the window at the city going dark, floor by floor, tower by tower. The way it did every night, this enormous, indifferent, beautiful thing that kept moving regardless of what any individual in it was managing or building or surviving. She thought about the prepaid phone in the drawer. She thought about Marcus, at whatever address Diana had arranged, sitting with 8 years of documents and the particular solitude of a man who has finally done the one right thing and has to wait now to find out what it costs. She thought about what she'd said to Celeste. Tomorrow I'll know more, and the day after that. So will a number of other people. She thought about Celeste standing on the steps of her building at 6 in the evening, without a bag. In the cold, the specific image of a woman who had lost her grip on the situation and was trying to find it again through sheer presence, through showing up at the location of the problem and demanding it resolve itself on her terms. Naomi turned on the stove burner under the kettle and reached for the chamomile tea. Not tonight, she thought. Tomorrow. Marcus Hale would walk into Diana Chu's office under his real name and hand 8 years of documented evidence to a federal attorney. Tomorrow. Garrett Vane's 22-year financial architecture would begin to come apart. Tomorrow. A mandatory independent audit of a $40 million trust would become not a future event, but an imminent one. And Celeste Vane, who had spent 4 years building a case designed to ensure that tomorrow never came, would have to face the specific consequence of having underestimated the person she'd tried to erase. The kettle began to heat. The apartment was quiet. Naomi stood at the stove and kept her hands flat on the counter and let herself have exactly 60 seconds of something that was not triumph too costly for triumph, too hard won, but was the closest thing to it she had room for tonight. Then she reached for her mug and poured the water and went back to work. Chapter 5. She doesn't fall. She aims the U.S. Attorney's office occupied a set of floors in a federal building on St. Andrews Plaza that had the particular institutional gravity of a place where consequential things happened without anyone raising their voice. Diana had arranged for Naomi to join the 8 o'clock call by phone. Dr. Anand had vetoed the idea of Naomi making the trip downtown, with a firmness that brooked no negotiation, and so at 7:55, Naomi was in the library, at the desk in the corner, with a fresh legal pad and a cup of tea and her phone on speaker, when Diana's number came through. "We're all on," Diana said. "Naomi, you have Assistant U.S. Attorney Rebecca Marsh on the line." "Rebecca, Naomi Hale." "Mrs. Hale." Rebecca Marsh had the voice of someone who had spent 20 years in rooms where people lied to her and had developed a specific, efficient patience as a result. "I've spent the last hour going through what Ms. Chu sent over last night. I want to start by telling you that what you have is significant. The documentation is detailed. The evidentiary chain is traceable. And the scale of what we're looking at warrants serious federal attention." "Thank you," Naomi said. "I have some questions about the source of the original documents." Ms. Chu indicated the individual would be making himself available today. "He will be," Naomi said. "He'll come in this morning." "Good, because his testimony is going to be central to the criminal case. The documents are strong, but a first-hand account of the coercion, the staged disappearance, the ongoing threat structure, is what elevates this from a financial fraud case to something with significantly more reach." A brief pause. "Mrs. Hale, I want to be direct with you. The man who held oversight authority over your trust has connections in this city that go back 30 years. When we move, we need to move correctly. If there are any other parties who should be brought in before we file, anyone who might have information or anyone who might be at risk. There is one more thing, Naomi said. She looked at the legal pad. The woman who hired the contractor, Celeste Vane. I want to understand what my options are there. A pause. On what basis? Solicitation, Naomi said. She contracted for my death. I don't have a signed agreement between her and the contractor, but I have the contractor, and I have the communication records from the network she used. Diana has copies. She paused. And last night she came to my home. No appointment. No legal representation. She came to find out what I know. That's not nothing, Marsh said. And her voice had shifted slightly, the efficient patience acquiring a sharper edge. If the contractor is willing to provide a statement, he is, Naomi said, then we may be able to move on both tracks simultaneously. Financial fraud and solicitation are separate charges, separate evidentiary structures. But they can be pursued in parallel if we're careful about sequencing. Another pause. Mrs. Hale, how far along are you? 34 weeks and 4 days. Then we're filing today. Marsh said, I'm not waiting on this. Give me until noon to prepare the initial filing documents. And I want the source in my office at 2 o'clock. Miss Chu, can you make that happen? Already planned for it, Diana said. Good. Mrs. Hale, stay home. Stay safe. And if Celeste Vane makes contact again, you don't speak to her without counsel present. Understood. Understood, Naomi said. She hung up. She sat for a moment with her hand on the legal pad. Then she picked up the prepaid phone and sent Marcus 2 words. 2 o'clock. The response came in less than a minute. The same as always. Clean and without elaboration. I'll be there. Dominic left for the office at 8:30 with instructions Naomi had given him the night before. Behave normally. Engage with Celeste as you would on any other day. Do not give her a reason to move before noon. He had listened to these instructions with the focused attention he brought to critical situations at the company, which was, Naomi thought, probably the most useful version of him available right now. And she was willing to work with the tools she had. She spent the morning at the desk. Gerald Fitch called at 9 with the full trust history, and she went through it with the systematic care of someone who had spent 4 years doing exactly this kind of document review, tracking the management fee structures, the investment redirections, the administrative charges that appeared at irregular intervals in amounts just below the threshold that would have triggered automatic fiduciary review. Garrett Vane had been meticulous. He had been careful. He had, over 22 years, developed a near-perfect architecture of concealed extraction, the kind of structure that only fails when someone on the inside keeps the original documents. Marcus had kept the original documents. She built a supplemental summary, 3 pages, organized by year, tracking the divergence between the trust's stated investment strategy and its actual allocation history, and sent it to Diana at 10:15. At 11, Rosa arrived, took one look at Naomi at the desk with 3 legal pads and an empty teacup, and, without saying anything, went to the kitchen and came back 20 minutes later with a plate of food and fresh tea, set both on the corner of the desk, and returned to her work without comment. Naomi ate without looking up from the documents. At 11:47, her phone rang. Dominic, she's gone, he said. Naomi looked up. What do you mean gone? She called in sick at 9. She's not in the building. I sent someone to check her office. Her personal items are there. Laptop, portfolio. She left in a hurry. A pause. Naomi. There's something else. The building security log shows she badged in at 6:43 this morning and accessed the document storage room on 32. She was in there for 11 minutes. Document storage. What's on 32? Historical financial records. Paper files. Pre-digital. The kind of thing legal holds in deep storage. His voice was careful. Naomi. I have a records inventory from this morning's automated audit that shows 11 folders checked out under her badge. I don't know yet what was in them. Naomi set down her pen. Can you find out quickly? Legal is pulling the catalog now. 20 minutes, maybe 30. Call me the moment you have it. She paused. Dominic, she's not going to run. She's not the type. She took documents because she's building a counter-narrative. She wants something in her hands before this afternoon. A brief silence. How do you know what's happening this afternoon? Because I'd assume it, Naomi said. And so would she. She picked up her pen. Call me when you have the inventory. She hung up and sat for a moment, both hands flat on the desk. Celeste had moved this morning, which meant she'd made a decision last night, after Naomi walked past her on the steps, after she'd had the night to assess what she did and didn't know. She didn't know about Marcus. She didn't know about the original documents, but she was smart enough to know that whatever Naomi had was real. And she was smart enough to understand that her best defense required documentation of her own, which meant she was not running. She was preparing to fight. Good, Naomi thought. Let her fight. Diana called at 12:40. Initial filing is done, she said, without preamble. Rebecca Marsh filed at 12:15. Garrett Vane is going to receive some very unpleasant paperwork sometime this afternoon. A pause. Marcus is here. He came in at noon. I don't think he slept. We've been going through his testimony outline for the 2 o'clock meeting. Another pause. A different quality to this one. Naomi, he brought something else. Something he didn't mention yesterday. What? A recording. Audio. From a meeting he was present for 6 months before he disappeared. A meeting with Garrett Vane and 2 of the shell company administrators. He recorded it without their knowledge. It's 23 minutes long. And in the first 8 minutes, Garrett Vane explicitly outlines the plan to frame Marcus for the fraud in enough detail to make any jury understand exactly what happened. Diana's voice had the specific quality of a woman who has been practicing law for 12 years and is trying not to sound as excited as she is. Naomi, this isn't just documentation. This is a recording of a man explaining, in his own words, how he destroyed your father's life. Naomi closed her eyes for a moment. Open them. Diana, she said, can you do one more thing before 2 o'clock? Name it. I need you to get Rebecca Marsh the recording before the meeting. I need her to have heard it before Marcus walks in. I need her to understand, when she looks at him, exactly what the last 8 years have cost him and why. A brief pause. Already sending it, Diana said. Take care of yourself. I'll call you after the 2 o'clock. Naomi set the phone down. She looked at the photograph on the library shelf. The Cape Cod dock. The summer she was 9, the scar. She thought about her father sitting in Diana's conference room with an audio recording he'd kept for 23 years longer than she'd known he was alive. Longer than she'd been grieving him. Longer than Garrett Vane had spent building a comfortable life on the wreckage of someone else's. She thought about what it meant to carry something like that and not be able to use it, because using it meant surfacing, and surfacing meant risk. And somewhere along the line, the fear of the risk had calcified into a different kind of life that looked from the outside like simply being gone. She didn't forgive him. She wasn't ready to forgive him, but she understood. Sitting in the library with the October light coming through the window, that understanding and forgiving were two different rooms, and she was only standing in the first one. The second one she would get to later, when the baby was here and the case was filed, and the specific immediate weight of the last 2 weeks had been set down somewhere and she'd had time to breathe. Later, Dominic called at 1:15. "I have the inventory," he said. "The 11 folders she pulled this morning, they're all pre-digital financial records from 8 and 9 years ago. The early years of the Garrett Vane consulting relationship." A pause. "Naomi, these are records that would show Hale Group's financial entanglement with Vane's operation. If she's building a counter-narrative, she's going to try to argue that the company, and by extension, the company's leadership, had knowledge of the fraud. She's going to try to implicate you," Naomi said. "Yes, or, at minimum, create enough noise around the company's historical relationship with Vane that the investigation gets complicated and slowed down." His voice was steady, but she could hear what was underneath it, the specific controlled anger of a man who has finally understood exactly how far the person he trusted has been willing to go. "What do I do?" "Nothing yet," Naomi said. "Let her build whatever she's building. She doesn't know what we filed this morning. She's preparing a defense for a threat she doesn't have the full shape of." She paused. "She's going to reach out to you today, before end of business. She's going to want a meeting, probably frame it as needing to protect the company, needing your help, needing you to understand that whatever is happening is more complicated than it looks." A silence. "You're very certain about that?" "She's out of moves, Dominic, except one. She's going to try to get you back in her corner, because a husband who supports his mistress against his wife is a much harder case for a federal attorney to build." She paused. "When she calls, agree to the meeting. Tell her you want to hear what she has to say. Set it for 4 o'clock at the Hale Group offices, in the main conference room. Not somewhere private, somewhere with glass walls and a front desk and building security." "And then what?" "Then call me," Naomi said. "I'll be there." Another silence. "Naomi, I'm 34 weeks pregnant, not incapacitated," she said. "I've been building this case for 2 weeks, and I intend to be in the room when it closes. Can you get me there safely?" A very brief pause. "Paul will pick you up at 3:30, he said. "Thank you, Naomi." His voice changed, that stripped-down quality again, the one she'd heard in the kitchen the morning after she'd told him everything. "Whatever she says in that room, whatever she tries, I need you to know that I know," she said. "I haven't earned the right to ask you to trust me again, but I need you to know that I do understand what I did, and what it cost you, and that I'm not going to, Dominic." She stopped him, not unkindly. "I know, we'll talk after." She paused. "Right now, I need you to answer the phone when Celeste calls." A breath. "Okay," he said. "Okay." The Hale Group occupied floors 28 through 35 of a glass tower on Park Avenue, and the main conference room on 29 had 3 walls of glass that looked out onto the open floor plan, which meant that anything that happened inside it was visible to approximately 40 people at any given point during business hours. Naomi had always liked this about the room. She liked the specific accountability of a space where nothing could be concealed. Paul brought her in through the building's side entrance at 3:55. Her back had been aching since noon alone, spreading pressure she'd been monitoring throughout the afternoon with the same methodical attention she'd been giving everything else. And the elevator ride up to 29 was long enough that she had a full conversation with the baby in her head. Not yet, just a few more hours. I need a few more hours, and then you can do whatever you need to do. The baby, unhelpfully, continued doing what it was doing. Dominic met her in the hallway outside the conference room. He took one look at her face and said, "You're in pain." "I'm fine," she said. "Naomi, I've been timing it," she said. "It's not labor. It's the walking and the stress. I'll sit down and it'll settle." She looked through the glass wall of the conference room. It was empty, the long table, the chairs, the view of Park Avenue through the outer windows, the corporate art on the one solid wall that she'd always thought was selected specifically to say nothing at all. "Has she confirmed?" She called at 1:40. Dominic said, "Exactly like you said. Same framing, needed to speak with me privately. Needed to protect the company. Needed me to understand the context." His voice was flat and factual. "I told her 4 o'clock. Main conference room." "Good." Naomi moved past him toward the conference room door. "Is Gerald here?" "He's on 32. I asked him to be available." "Good. I want him in the room." She stopped at the door. "And Dominic, when she comes in, let her speak first. Don't defend me. Don't defend yourself. Don't react to whatever she opens with. Just let her establish her position. Can you do that?" He looked at her. "Yes, then let's go in." Celeste arrived at 4:07. She came off the elevator in the same black coat she'd been wearing on the steps last night, which meant either she'd been out all day or she'd put it back on deliberately. And Naomi, watching through the glass wall, thought it was probably the latter. Celeste did nothing without intention. She scanned the floor as she came off the elevator, the open plan desks, the assistants, the people who tracked her with their eyes because she was a senior director and people tracked senior directors. And then she saw the conference room and she saw who was in it, and she stopped for 1/2 second before she resumed walking. 1/2 second, that was all. But Naomi had been watching for it. Celeste opened the conference room door and came in. She looked at Dominic first, a professional and composed look, carrying the specific warmth of someone performing a long familiarity. Then she looked at Naomi. Something happened in her face, a rapid recalibration, an assessment being rerun at speed, and then the composure reassembled itself. And she sat down across the table. "Naomi," she said, "I didn't know you'd be joining us." "I know you didn't," Naomi said. Gerald Fitch came in behind Celeste and sat at the end of the table without ceremony, setting a thin manila folder in front of him and folding his hands on top of it. Celeste glanced at him and then looked back at Dominic. "Dominic," she said, "I came because I want to protect the company. I think there are things happening right now that have the potential to create significant exposure for Hale Group, and I believe we need to address them before they become a public matter." She kept her voice measured. She kept her hands relaxed on the table. "What I've discovered in the historical records relates to the company's documented relationship with Garrett Vane's consulting operation. And I think before any regulatory contact occurs, the regulatory contact has already occurred," Naomi said. Celeste looked at her. An initial filing was made with the U.S. Attorney's Office at 12:15 today. Naomi said, financial fraud, 22 years, multi-party. Garrett Vane's name is on the filing. She paused. Your name is on a supplemental document. The room was very quiet, through the glass walls. The office floor continued its business keyboards, phones, the distant murmur of people who did not know what was happening in the conference room with the 3 walls of glass. Celeste's hands were still on the table. That's not possible, she said. It's done, Naomi said. It was done before you came in this morning to pull the historical files. Whatever counter-narrative you've been constructing today, it's being built over a foundation that no longer exists. Celeste looked at Dominic. Dominic, you need to understand that what Naomi is describing is a significant overreach. And the company's historical relationship with Vane is going to be pulled into this in ways that damage you personally and Celeste. Dominic's voice was quiet. Stop. She looked at him. Something shifted in her expression, not quite surprise, because she had been prepared for resistance, but a different kind of calculation. The one that runs when a resource you had counted on fails to perform as expected. The fabricated bank statements, Dominic said. The emails you showed me. The supplemental agreement you drafted. He held her gaze without expression. The contractor you hired. The last phrase landed in the room the way Naomi had known it would not loudly, because Dominic didn't do anything loudly, but with a specific, final weight that left nothing to respond to. Celeste looked at him for 3 full seconds. Then she looked at Naomi, and her face did something that Naomi had not expected. It went very still. Not with the practiced composure she'd been displaying since she walked in, but with something older than composure, something that looked almost like recognition, like arriving at a destination she'd known was coming and finding it exactly as terrible as anticipated. You can't prove the contractor, she said. Whatever you think you have. The contractor is cooperating with federal investigators. Naomi said. He provided a statement this morning. She paused. He also identified the network you used, the communication channel, and the specific language of the contract brief, which means we have enough to support a solicitation charge, separate from and in addition to the fraud filing. She let this settle for a moment. Celeste. Whatever you're planning to say next, understand that there is nothing in this room that changes what's been filed. There is nothing you can say to Dominic or to me that reverses this. The only conversation available to you now is the one you have with your own attorney. Celeste was silent. Gerald, Naomi said. Gerald Fitch opened his manila folder and slid a single document across the table. Your authorization badge for the company has been deactivated as of 3 o'clock today, he said, in the tone of a man reading from a checklist. Your access to company financial records has been suspended. Your employment status is under review pending the outcome of the federal investigation. This document outlines the terms of your administrative leave. He paused. You'll need to surrender your company devices before you leave the building today. Celeste looked at the document. She did not pick it up. She sat with her hands on the table and her eyes on the page, and Naomi watched her work through it, the whole architecture of 4 years, assembled piece by careful piece, coming apart in a conference room with glass walls, while 40 people went about their business 30 feet away. My father, Celeste said, and her voice was different, stripped of the board presentation register. Something rawer underneath it, something that was almost a real feeling. He built something. It took him 30 years. You're going to take it apart in a federal court proceeding, and it'll be gone in. She stopped. Her jaw tightened. You don't understand what it cost him to build what he built. I know exactly what it cost, Naomi said. Her voice was even. It cost my father 8 years of his life. It cost my child a grandfather who was present. It cost me 4 days alone in an apartment after a funeral that shouldn't have happened. She paused. Whatever Garrett Vane built, he built on someone else's foundation. I'm not interested in what it cost him. I'm interested in what he took. Celeste looked at her. The composure was still there, but it was structural. Now the kind of composure that exists, not because you're not feeling something, but because you've decided the feeling has nowhere useful to go. You think this makes you righteous, she said. No, Naomi said. I think it makes me done. She stood up, slowly, one hand on the table for balance. Gerald will walk you through the device surrender process. I'd strongly recommend you call an attorney before you leave the building. She picked up her bag. Goodbye, Celeste. She walked to the conference room door. She opened it. She stepped out onto the office floor without looking back. She was in the hallway outside, waiting for the elevator, when Dominic came out of the conference room behind her. He stood beside her without speaking for a moment, both of them facing the elevator doors. That went, he started. Don't, she said quietly. Just give me a minute. He was quiet. The elevator arrived, and they got in, and the doors closed, and she stood in the mirrored elevator with her hand on the rail and let herself feel the full weight of it, not triumph. Still not that, but something close to the bone. Something that had to do with the specific relief of a sustained thing finally being over. Her back was still aching. The low pressure had moved. It was different now. Less spreading and more purposeful. And she was aware of it in a way that she was beginning to think required acknowledgement. The elevator opened on the lobby. They walked out through the building's side entrance into the October evening, and Paul was at the curb, and the air was cold and sharp and smelled like the city in the specific way it did after a dry day when the cold came in. Naomi stopped on the sidewalk and stood for a moment, both hands on her stomach, and breathed. Dominic stood beside her. He didn't reach for her. He waited. Dominic, she said. Yes, I need you to tell Paul to take us to Lenox Hill, a beat, the hospital. Yes, he was already reaching for his phone. How long has it been since about noon? She said. He stopped moving. He looked at her, Naomi. It's been, I know how long it's been, she said. I was timing them. They were irregular and manageable, and I had things to finish. She looked at him over her shoulder. They're not irregular anymore, for one single moment. Dominic Hale's CEO of a billion-dollar company, a man who had navigated board coups and market crashes, and the very specific sustained pressure of the last 2 weeks, looked exactly like what he was, which was a man who was terrified and also, underneath the terror, something that looked almost incandescently alive with the significance of the thing that was happening. Okay, he said. His voice was not entirely steady. Okay, Paul, he was already moving to the car. Lenox Hill. Now, please. Naomi walked to the car. She got in. She sat back against the seat and let the ache do what it was doing and thought about nothing except breathing. And the city moved past the windows in the particular gold and gray of an October evening. And somewhere in a federal building on St. Andrew's Plaza, a case was opened and a name was being written on a document that would take a long time to fully play out but had begun, irrevocably, to move. She was in labor for 11 hours. Not continuous agony, that was not what it was. Though there were certainly peaks, it was more like a sustained, progressive negotiation between her body and a process that had its own timeline and was not particularly interested in her preferences about that timeline. Dominic stayed. He sat in the chair beside the bed, and when she needed him to be quiet, he was quiet, and when she needed him to say something, he tried. And some of what he said was useful, and some of it was not. And at one point she told him, with great specificity and no apology, that if he said the phrase "you're doing so well" one more time, she would need him to leave the room. And he did not say it again. Dr. Anand arrived at midnight and managed the room with the same brisk, warm efficiency she brought to everything. And at 3:47 in the morning, a sound entered the world that Naomi had been waiting for, without knowing how much she'd been waiting for it, high and clear, and absolutely certain of its own presence. The sound of someone brand new insisting on being heard. A boy, 7 pounds, 4 ounces, dark hair, which was unexpected, eyes that were, in those first unfocused moments, the gray-blue of early morning before the city fully woke. Dominic held him first, because Naomi's arms were shaking not from weakness, but from the specific aftermath of the kind of sustained effort that leaves the body momentarily uncertain of itself. She watched Dominic hold his son for the first time, watched his face do something she had no category for, something that was entirely outside the register of any expression she'd seen him use in 3 years of marriage. And she thought, there you are. That's who you actually are. When they put the baby in her arms. She sat with him for a long time without speaking. He was real and warm and impossibly specific, his own particular weight, his own features, the way he turned his face against her, as if he already knew the direction to orient toward. She had spent 9 months preparing to love someone. And now that someone was here, and the preparation turned out to have been entirely inadequate in the best possible way. "Hi," she said softly. "I know, it's a lot out here, but you're okay. We're okay." She looked at Dominic across the room. He was watching them with that face, the real one, the stripped-down one, and she held his gaze, and he held hers. And she thought about what she'd said to him in the library 2 weeks ago. "I know it's not enough, but I need to say it." And what she'd said back, "I know you are. Go eat." There were conversations still to have. There were things that had been broken that would take time and effort and specific, deliberate work to repair, not all at once. Not in a hospital room at 4 in the morning, but over time. In all the ordinary daily moments that time was made of. She knew this. She was not naive about it. But he was here. He had chosen correctly. Finally, when the choice was hardest. And she was not the kind of person who failed to notice when someone did the hard thing. "Come here," she said. He crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed beside her. Careful. Looking at his son with an expression that was still trying to organize itself into something coherent and not quite managing. "What are we going to call him?" Dominic asked. His voice was low, the way voices got in this kind of room, at this kind of hour, intimate by necessity, pulled inward by the weight of something too significant for ordinary volume. Naomi looked at the baby. She thought about the conference room and the parking garage and the library at midnight and the legal pads and the woman who'd stood on the steps of her building in a black coat and been told, quietly and without drama, that it was already over. She thought about a man sitting in a room arranged by Diana Chu, with a gray nylon case and 8 years of documents and a recording of his own destruction, waiting to walk into a federal building and attach his real name to the truth. "I want to think about it," she said. "A few days." Dominic nodded. He put his hand on the edge of the blanket, close but not touching, the way he did when he was waiting to know if he was welcome. She looked at his hand. She looked at his face. She shifted the baby slightly and put her free hand over his. He exhaled a slow, long breath, the kind that carries more than air, and she felt it in the way she felt most things lately, precisely and without flinching. "Okay," he said, "a few days." She sent the text on the second day. She had been thinking about it since the night before, how to say it, whether to say it, what she was actually ready to offer and what she was not. She had landed on the understanding that she did not need to be fully ready. She only needed to be honest about where she was. The prepaid phone was in Dominic's coat pocket. He'd brought it from the apartment along with the other things she'd asked him to pack, which said something about how well he'd been paying attention. She typed with one thumb while the baby slept against her chest. "Room 412. Visiting hours are 9 to 7. You don't have to come in. But if you want to see him through the window, the nurse's station will know your name." She set the phone down and looked at the ceiling of the hospital room and breathed. Dominic was at the window with a cup of bad hospital coffee, looking out at the city in the morning. He had been awake for close to 30 hours and looked it. In the specific dignified way, he managed even exhaustion, the rumpled version of himself. A version she had always found more trustworthy than the curated one. "I told you there was a conversation we'd need to have," she said, "about the evidence, about where the documents came from." He turned from the window. He looked at her and at the baby, and he set down the coffee. "I'm ready when you are," he said. She had thought about how to begin this for 2 days. She had composed and discarded a dozen different opening lines, each one too precise or too blunt or carrying the wrong weight. In the end, she started the only way she knew how to start hard things, directly, from the middle of what was true. "My father is alive," she said. The hospital room was very quiet. The baby breathed. The city moved outside the window. Dominic sat down. She told him everything. Marcus came at 2 o'clock. He did not come into the room. She had not asked him to, and he had not presumed to. He was learning, she thought, the specific discipline of not presuming, and she gave him credit for it. She was sitting up in the bed with the baby asleep in the bassinet beside her when one of the nurses knocked and said, quietly, that there was a gentleman at the nurse's station who said he was on the list. "Yes," Naomi said, "he's on the list." She watched through the interior window of the room, the long glass panel that ran beside the door, as Marcus was directed down the hall toward the nursery viewing window. He was in different clothes from the last time she'd seen him, a dark coat, ordinary, the kind of coat a person wears when they are no longer trying to be invisible, but have not yet figured out what it looks like to be visible again. He walked with the careful posture of a man who has spent years making himself smaller and is still practicing the reverse. He stood at the nursery window for a long time. She could see the side of his face from where she sat, the jaw she recognized, the lines she didn't. The expression of someone receiving something they had long since stopped believing was possible and are trying, slowly, to let it be real. The baby was not in the nursery. He was in the bassinet 3 feet from her. Marcus was looking at the other babies, the other family's miracles. and she thought about calling the nurse and having the bassinet brought to the window. And then she thought, not yet, not yet. Because this particular window, the literal and figurative glass between where he was and where she was exactly the right amount of distance for right now. Near enough to see. Far enough to understand that proximity had to be earned. She watched him stand there for 12 minutes. When he turned to walk back toward the elevator, he looked through the interior window of her room and saw her watching. He stopped. They looked at each other through the glass, her in the hospital bed, him in the hallway, the baby in the bassinet between them and out of his sight, and the 8 years and all that had filled them hanging in the air of the distance. She raised her hand. Not a wave, just a hand raised. I see you. I am here. We are not done. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Then he did the same, one hand, raised briefly. The gesture carrying everything that was too large for any sentence to hold. He walked to the elevator. The doors opened and he stepped in and they closed behind him. Naomi put her hand on the edge of the bassinet. The baby slept with the absolute authority of someone who has decided that the world can wait. That was your grandfather, she said quietly. He has some things to account for, but he came. She looked at the ceiling. She let the morning light do what it was doing across the hospital room, moving slowly. The way light moved in early November, like it was measuring something. He came, she said again, and left it there. For now, not an absolution, not a verdict, but a fact, a beginning. The kind of beginning that does not announce itself as such, but simply arrives. In the form of a man standing at a window, and a woman raising her hand, and the specific, hard-won distance between them that is not the same as being apart, outside. New York went about its business with its usual magnificent indifference. And in room 412 at Lenox Hill, in the early light of a November morning, 3 people who had arrived here by different and difficult roads breathed the same air. And the baby slept. And the rest of it, the conversations, the repairs, the long and specific work of choosing each other on purpose waited, with patience, to begin.